In our last episode, we witnessed some of the sailors trying to kidnap the Formosan royalty. They were trying to flee the Obra Dinn with the royalty on 2 dinghies. We also witnessed the execution of one of the Formosan guards for a crime he didn't commit. And then we saw that crime take place and discovered that the true murderer was one of the officers, who then went on to frame one of the Formosan guards. But that's where the trail of memories that came from these corpses ended. We now have to explore the Obra Dinn to pick up a new trail. We see that a hatch has opened up on the gun deck, leading down to the Orlop deck. We see a large puddle of fluid on the ground, and while exploring the Orlop deck, we see a cattle skull hanging on the wall. Well, now is an opportunity to see if the memento mortem works on animal remains.
Take him to the carpet. Same wraps and keep the last right.
Hit her here. One swing. Get through the skull in stone or brain. I'll cut her throat when you've done it.
Here?
Yeah. Come on before she kicks up. You all right there, sir?
Never been on a farm, Charlie?
Mind your shoes now.
We see 3 men butchering cattle for meat. There's this guy, whom we saw during the execution, wearing his long apron. Next to him, holding the animal down, is one of the midshipmen. We previously identified him as Peter Milroy, and on the other side of him, dealing the lethal blow, is another midshipman. This is the guy who overheard the mutiny in episode 3, and his face is now unblurred. Next to them, we see a guy vomiting. He's the last midshipman, standing between the other 2. And his face is also unblurred. Moving towards the stairs, we see a number of men dragging a body up them. Observing this is a man with a monkey on his shoulder, and carrying the men are a number of seamen, all of whom are still blurry. We haven't seen these guys before. We see a few more men standing on the other side of the stairs. These are the Formosans, but then we run out of time. Chapter 2, on the Orlop deck. A large cow was slaughtered for its meat. So this happened early on in the voyage, which is why we see a few of our murder victims still alive in this scene. And even though no human died in this scene, we get many clues that can help us identify previous victims. Taking a look at the transcript, we heard a voice saying, "Get him wrapped and see to his last rites." They weren't talking about the cow wasn't killed yet, and you normally don't give last rites to a cow. The man directed them to take him to the carpenters. You also don't need to take a cow to the carpenters to have a coffin measured and made, so this must have been a conversation between the men hauling the body up the stairs. Then, the other group of men butchered the animal. The man in charge of butchering the animal was being helped by 3 midshipmen, one of whom we know. The other 2 are now unblurred, and one of them drops a name. He says, "Are you all right there, Charlie?" We therefore know that the man vomiting is a midshipman based on how he's dressed and who he's surrounded by, and that his name is Charlie. So checking the manifest, sure enough, we find midshipman Charles Herstick. We can identify him here, but we don't yet know how he died, so we'll leave it at that. But identifying this midshipman allows us to identify the last one, the guy who overheard the mutiny previously, by process of elimination. The only midshipman we haven't identified is Thomas Lank from England. But we still can't complete his fate, because even though we know he was murdered for overhearing the mutiny, we don't know the name of the man who murdered him. But at least we're one step closer. Next, we can move to the man who was directing the butchering of the animal. We see him practicing his profession in this scene, which allows us to deduce his identity. Checking the manifest, we find only one butcher on board, Emil O'Farrell from Ireland. And sure enough, the voice giving direction had an Irish accent.
Get through the skull in stone or brain. I'll cut her throat when you've done it.
We don't know how he died, but at least we can identify him here. Back in the memory, we can again examine the Formosans. We see the bald man with the beard, who was being abducted in our last episode, and his guard. Then, if we move into the room right across from the stairs, we see a man making up a bed. He's the bald man dancing with Emily in the Underway sketch, but his face is still blurry. So, activating the memento mortem, we can find the next corpse. Sure enough, it's the one being hauled upstairs. After the ghostly trail places it on the stairs, we can explore the memory.
Well?
Same as the other fellow. Some lung disease, not consumption. Made worse by the cold.
Will it spread?
If so, we'd all have it. They must have picked it up at the Lasker house. I checked all hands just now, and everyone is healthy.
And him? What are his chances?
I gave him some laudanum. We'll see.
We see the man whose body was being hauled up the stairs, dying on this bed. Sitting next to him is the man who had the monkey on his shoulder, but his face is now unblurred. Turning around, we see Martin. He's likely the one who was asking questions of the man attending to the sick man. And leaning back in a chair is our bald man, whose face is now unblurred. Heading out of this room, we see two more men kneeling by yet another wrapped corpse. These are the two seamen we saw carrying the body of the dying man up the stairs after he died. And again, we see the same Formosans sitting and standing where they were in the last memory. Chapter 2, Part 2, in the surgeon's room. We don't know his name, but we do know how he died. Illness. This unknown soul succumbed to a tragic illness. We get a small clue as to his identity. The man speaking said that he may have picked up a disease at a Lasker house. The British called sailors from India or Southeast Asia Lascars. Lascars who migrated to Europe for work could be transferred from ship to ship, and while between ships, they would often stay together at Lasker houses. So that means this man and the other one were likely Indian or Southeast Asian. And even though no names were spoken, we can identify two other people by carefully observing what they were doing. The man with the mustache, in the first memory, was giving orders. He was telling the seaman to wrap the body and send it to the carpenter. In the second memory, he was answering questions from Martin, who's the third mate, an officer. Martin was asking about the health condition of the man lying on the stretcher. This, and the fact that this event took place in the surgeon's room, tells us that this man is Henry Evans, the surgeon. But Henry Evans? We know that name. Henry Evans was the name of the man who sent us the memento mortem, who provided the initial sketch of the events that took place on this ship that we are now filling out. And in his opening letter, he tells us where he is. He's in Morocco. That means that we know his fate. He's alive in Africa. And the fate of Henry Evans allows us to seal the fate of two more people. We recall in episode 3, Escape, we saw two of the 4 women on board escaping out to sea in a dinghy. But there were 2 men on board as well. At the time, we had no idea who they were. Their faces were blurry. But going back to watch that memory again, we see that one of the men fleeing was Henry Evans, the surgeon. So if Henry Evans abandoned the ship with 3 other people and ended up in Africa, it's likely that everyone on board the dinghy who fled the ship also ended up in Africa. Indeed, we even see the box that contained the memento mortem and this book in the boat right next to Henry Evans. So heading back to the Justice at Sea sketch, we can record the fate of Emily Jackson as being alive in Africa. Well done. 3 more fates correct. Great news. So the fates we recorded in our last episode were accurate. But we're not done. Miss Jane Bird was also in the dinghy, and so we can record her fate as being alive and also in Africa. There was a fourth person on the dinghy, but we don't recognize him yet. So for now, we can neither identify him nor list his fate. Finally, we can identify the bald man. His face is unblurred. In the first memory, we saw him cleaning the bed that the sick man was lying on. In the second memory, he was in the surgeon's room, leaning back in a chair. He must have worked closely with Henry Evans, the surgeon. This man was James Wallace, the surgeon's mate. We do not yet know what happened to him, but at least we can positively identify him. Back in the memory, we can activate the memento mortem. And it highlights the wrapped body we saw lying on the floor.
Эй, наплевать, привязывай. С собой следи, мужчина. सैयद उठो कुछ पी लो.
So this man succumbed to illness while lying in his hammock. Another man leans over him, referring to him as Syed, expressing concern. We see a few more seamen lying in their hammocks next to him, and we see that each of these hammocks is numbered. All of their portraits are crowded together in the Life at Sea sketch, and they're sleeping together, and they likely all speak the same language, which means they're likely all from the same place. This will help us identify them later. Now, we did hear what sounded like gambling at the beginning of the memory, and turning around, sure enough, we see three men gambling at a table. One of them we haven't seen much of before, but another guy, the guy holding cards, was part of the firing squad from our last episode. And the final guy is our big bearded guy who was killed by Emily during the escape chapter. They gamble at a table beneath empty hammocks, all tagged with numbers. And inside a bag hanging from one of the hammocks, we see a tobacco pipe. Chapter 2, Part 1, On the Gun Deck. This memory gave us a bunch of vital information. Inspecting the transcript, we see two different languages being spoken. The first is a conversation between the gamblers. This is clearly Russian. The second language is Hindi, a language spoken in India. And since we know that both of the sick men had spent time in a Lascar house, we can deduce that both victims are probably Indian. We can identify this man because his name was spoken by his friend. Heading to the manifest, we see 4 seamen from India, one named Solomon Syed. And we know his fate. Like the last man, he succumbed to a tragic illness. And taking a look at the sketch, we see him among a group of 4. These must be the other 3 Indians. And we notice that all 4 of their faces are unblurred. The man lying sick in bed, Solomon Syed, is number 54. Sure enough, number 54 on the manifest is Solomon. Next, the man comforting him is the only one not in his hammock. The only empty hammock is number 53. Inspecting the manifest, we see that this is William Wassim. So heading back to the sketch, we can identify him as William Wassim, but we don't yet know how he died. The man lying down in his hammock also appears to be sick. That's because he's none other than the guy who died in our second memory. Taking a look at his hammock, we see number 51. So we can get his name. Inspecting the manifest, we see that number 51 is Renfred Rajub. Well done! 3 more fates correct. With each new clue, the hard work we put in our previous episodes begins to pay off. The pieces to this puzzle are finally coming together. In the last hammock, we see a man sitting straight up. But his number is X. At this point, I'm not sure why the tag said X. Perhaps they ran out of numbers, or perhaps he joined the voyage later, but we can still identify him through process of elimination. There is only one Indian unaccounted for. He was sleeping with the Indians. He's likely the final Indian on our manifest, Abraham Akbar. And we know his fate. He was the one crushed by a loose cannon in episode 2. This was the guy who already lit the fuse of the cannon before the gunner said, "belay spark." That cannon was then grabbed by the Kraken, and when it exploded, it killed both the gunner, whom we identified in our last episode as Christian Wolf, and another sailor. Now that we know who lit the spark, if we wanted to, we could change this man's fate from being blasted with a cannon by a terrible beast to being blasted by a cannon by Abraham Akbar. Both of these options will work. Turning around from this scene, we see 4 more hammocks, and the occupants of these hammocks are all sleeping. Their blankets are pulled up over their faces, so we can't match them with the manifest. However, we do see their numbers. Number 56, number 55, number 57, and number 58. Checking the manifest, we see these guys are all from different places. Hamandou Diom, Sierra Leone, Henry Brennan from England, we identified him already, Alexander Booth from England, and Patrick O'Hennigan from Ireland. So these tags aren't very helpful to us at the moment. Then, moving to a section of the gun deck, just above the Indian section, we find more hammocks, all of which are filled with sleeping sailors. And their blankets are pulled up over their faces, so we can't identify them. But we do see their numbers. Number 59, 39, 40, 41, and 38. Here we find all 4 of the Chinese topmen, Huang Li, Ji Zhang, Li Hong, and Wei Li. And also number 59, George Shirley from England. So we know that all 4 of the Chinese sailors are sleeping here. We're not going to solve any fates with these guys right now, but this is one moment where we have all the people from China alive and together in the same scene. We can take our time to examine their clothing. In particular, the style of shoes each one is wearing and what type of pants they're wearing, since in many cases only their legs and shoes are visible in these hammocks. We'll use these as references to connect some dots later on. Turning around, we can go back to the Russians gambling. 3 Russians are at the table beneath their 3 hammocks. Since no one is in their hammocks, we can't associate any of these guys with the numbers from their hammocks. But here's where our observation pays off. Hanging from hammock number 47 is a bag with a pipe in it. We've seen a man smoking a pipe before. In our last episode, while the sailors were abducting the Formosans, we saw one man standing in a dinghy with a pipe in his mouth, and hanging at his side was this same bag. This gives us his face. He was part of the firing squad. This bag with the pipe is likely hanging from the hammock of the man who owns the bag and the pipe, which means the owner of the pipe is number 47. Checking the manifest, we see that number 47 is Alexei Toporov. Heading to the Justice at Sea sketch, sure enough, we see that his portrait is unblurred. We can now with confidence identify this man as Alexei Toporov. That leaves only 2 Russians who were gambling at the table yet to be identified. The final 2 Russian hammocks are numbered 45 and 46, which means they have to be Leonid Volkov and Alarkus Nikishin, the only 2 remaining Russians on board. But as of yet, their faces are still blurry, and we don't have enough information to identify them. On the other side of the Russians gambling, we find more hammocks hanging by the stairs. 2 are outside the memory, so we can't explore them, but 2 are inside. Here we find number 37 and number 42. Their faces are also covered, but one of the men, number 37, is sleeping with his arm hanging out of the hammock. And inspecting that arm, what's this? We see a very familiar tattoo of a woman. We saw this tattoo in our last episode. This was the man who was shot by the officer while he was trying to abduct the Formosan royalty. He got his leg tangled up in the riggings, and we found his leg bones hanging outside the first mate's cabin window. Thanks to this hammock, we now know his number on the manifest, and we can finally record his fate. Heading back to Chapter 3 Murder, we can record this unknown soul as being number 37, Timothy Butement, a topman from Scotland. The guy in the other hammock is 42, Nicholas Botterill. All we know is that he's alive at this point. We don't have any more information to identify him. When done, we can turn around and walk out the door to leave the memory. Three people died during this chapter. As it's chapter 2, these events took place not long after they left England, before they arrived at the Canary Islands. Now, we have to explore the Orlop deck to find more human remains to access the next memory trail. We'll continue with our investigation in my next episode. I publish new videos each and every week here on my channel, so if you don't want to miss it, be sure to subscribe and to click that bell notification button. If you have and you feel like you're still missing out on YouTube notifications, consider following me on Twitter at Oxhorn. I update Twitter manually with every new piece of content that I publish. I have a shirt shop with completely unique designs that you can't find anywhere else. My designs come on shirts in a variety of men's, women's, and children's sizes, and in a wide array of colors. You can find them on other products as well, like smartphone cases, pillows, posters, mugs, stickers, prints, etc. So if interested, you can find a link to my shop in the description below, or you can click here. If you like what I do and you want to support me in a more personal way, consider becoming a patron on Patreon or a member here on YouTube. But more than anything, I'm just so glad you're here watching this video with me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon with more brand new videos.